Hello, everyone. Welcome into a full edition of Ville on the Ville. A lot to go through today, a little more than I can fit into a 2-minute and 20-second quick take on Twitter, so I figured I would go ahead and do a 10 or 15-minute episode today. Took longer to get going today than I had hoped. My software kept crashing, very aggravating, got through it, finally got it figured out and resolved, so now we can get on with our episode today. Starting off with the baseball team, got a good win the other night over Western Kentucky, moved to 27-13 on the season. Kind of a rough game if you watch this one. It was kind of wet and damp. Very slow start. 3 pitchers for Louisville in the first inning. Western gets up 3-0. I think that first inning went almost 50 minutes. 5 total pitchers used. Louisville came back and tied it at the end of the first inning. Game went very long, but in the end, Cardinals got the job done. And now they will remain out of conference this weekend against Indiana State, trying to kind of get their mojo going again after yet another disappointing series loss to Virginia over this past weekend. That's kind of been the story for this baseball team. They just can't quite keep that consistency going in conference. Just 2-5 in ACC series with just 3 series remaining. So the best they can hope to finish in terms of series record is 5-5, and that would require them to beat Boston College, Pittsburgh, and Notre Dame to finish out. Certainly not something they're incapable of doing, but as I tweeted out the other day, until they just get through one of these situations where they seem to have that victory in hand and then give it away down the stretch, they're going to probably have a little doubt in there. Dan McDonald is very good at keeping them positive, so hopefully that'll rub off, and as they finish out this season, they'll start to get over the hump in those games and maybe finish strong, finish at 500, which they still can do in terms of their series record. They're only one game under 500 overall in ACC play at 10-11, so their overall record still decent. I don't think they're in any trouble of not making the postseason as it sits right now, but of course the more wins they get, the better. But again, it'll be more than a week before they get back into conference play as they face Indiana State this weekend and then go to Vanderbilt. Tough non-conference game. That would certainly be a good win for their resume if they can get that next week in their midweek matchup. So that's how the baseball cards sit right now. Just one of those seasons where I don't think any of us expected them to be fantastic, except to step back. But after that big start I've talked about before, they got out to that 14-0 start for the second year in a row. They were the last undefeated team in college baseball. I think a lot of people maybe got their hopes up a little more than we probably should have. Now they've kind of come back down to earth. But again, a lot of these series, they're within 1 or 2 plays of winning them. So let's see if they can finish off strong, get back to 500 in conference in terms of that series record, and see how things finish up. Next up, of more important concern, I think, to a lot of people right now, is basketball recruiting. Louisville has struck out basically in the grad transfer market. I think most people, including myself, expected Louisville to get at least 1, if not 2, of these higher-end grad transfers that were on the market. Now, I don't think anyone out there is of the caliber of a Damian Lee that we saw a couple years ago, or even a Trey Lewis. That Louisville, of course, got both of those guys and came in and were able to fill significant roles for Louisville in that season that unfortunately ended in the postseason self-ban by Louisville. But I don't think there was anybody out there of that caliber. However, there were some guys that Louisville probably could have used. They could give them valuable minutes, especially in the backcourt, and to fill that roster out. Right now, they still sit at just 8 players. And as many have expressed the concern that how do you even field a solid scout team in practice if you only have 8 guys? So they definitely have holes to fill. I would lie if I said I wasn't concerned. You would hope that this staff, that they are very good. We've all heard them talk. They're very knowledgeable, very personable, seem to care a lot about the sport, the game, now the Louisville program. You would think that charismatic attitude that they have would play out on the recruiting trail. They'd be able to get some of these guys, but I think now we're starting to realize how up against it Louisville is. I'll talk a little bit later about how continuing stories and articles and reports and now books, it's affecting Louisville. And even though I think all of college basketball has this cloud of the FBI scandal hanging over it, Louisville has a little bit extra that those others do not have. And whether it's fair or not, the recruiting trail is far from fair when it comes to doing things to give yourself an advantage. And in terms of gaining a disadvantage, Louisville is up against it when others use everything that's been published about Louisville, been talked about Louisville against them to get recruits, whether they be incoming freshmen or even grad transfers. The guys you would think would have less to worry about with just 1 year to play, but then maybe some people are even saying, look at those last grad transfers Louisville had that played significant roles. They suffered a postseason ban, so no telling what might be in the future for Louisville. I have a hard time thinking anyone would believe that next year would be in jeopardy in terms of any kind of punishment or ban for Louisville, especially self-imposed. I definitely think Louisville learned a lesson there. They're not going to do that again, but I think we're learning how up against it they are. Now, I guess maybe some positive news you could say. Courtney Ramey was in for that visit on Tuesday, and from all reports, it went pretty well. Louisville Sports Live had an interview with his father. He seemed to indicate it went well. He didn't make the trip because of work reasons. He wasn't able to make it. It had nothing to do with him not wanting to be here. But it was a very good interview. I encourage you to go listen to it. If you can get the podcast, download that. But he was very, articulated very well what happened. The reason that the visit by Louisville coaches was canceled seemed very legitimate. He seemed very genuine in his apology and the reasons that it happened. I think basically he just kind of misestimated or underestimated the timing of when things, he assumed that the 3 days that he planned for Courtney to be on that trip were 3 full days, and it was really more like almost 4 days when you included maybe a half day going in and coming back, and it just kind of got messed up as far as the schedule goes, and turns out Courtney had to leave the day before that 3-day span that he was accounting for happened, so that's what caused the cancellation. But it was a very good interview, and he claimed in that interview with Louisville Sports Live that Louisville was in the Final Four. As I listened to it, I'm not going to give off too many indications of, but my feeling was I wasn't all that encouraged. But he didn't say anything bad about Louisville other than the fact that he was honest about Louisville having to play catch up, even though Courtney had committed to Louisville previously. That was with a different staff. So Chris Mack and his coaching staff had some catching up to do in terms of the other schools that were on his short list of programs he might be going to. So go take a listen to it. See what you think. I'll let you form your own opinion. But certainly Louisville needs to get some bodies in. What are they going to do at this point? They'll probably have to go local, try to find some guys that maybe they might not be looking at in terms of traditional Louisville recruits. But who knows? You may get a diamond in the rough. There have been plenty of guys locally who've gone to lower tier programs, performed very well. Keenan Butler would come to mind, or Keenan Martin at Butler comes to mind. So there are some very good players out there that, and if they are local, especially in the Louisville metro area, they're going to have that passion if they grew up as a Louisville fan. They're going to bring that each and every day, be excited to play for Louisville and not just see Louisville as a program to get them to somewhere else, maybe as a mechanism to the next level. That's truly their dream, maybe to play at Louisville, and you might get a little more out of them. So who knows? But as far as the recruiting trail goes, and again, I'm going to say it every time I talk about recruiting, I'm not the expert. I'll give some opinions and some things I think. But as far as covering it, knowing every single guy and what they bring to the table, I'm going to be focusing more on once guys sign with Louisville, then I'll start to look at what they can provide, what their game includes, what it entails. But no question, it doesn't take an expert to realize that Louisville has a lot of work to do. You got to go in, I think, into a season with at least 10 players. And so I think Chris Mack needs to find at least 2 guys to make this team 10 so they can at least have a decent scout team in practice each and every day when they get into the season. So whether that's, local guys, like I said, that you may not recruit traditionally, or JUCO guys, or who knows, maybe at the last second there might be a grad transfer that pops up. Not really sure how that works. There might be some guys taking summer classes hoping to get to that point, and then maybe you can get a last-second grad transfer, but you really can't put too much in that. So I think they're still going to look to at least get to 10 before you get too late, and then maybe you fill that 10 out, then you may have 1 or 2 scholarships left over, where if a situation comes about where there's a late grad transfer, you can grab them, and really there's no risk there whatsoever. You can go ahead and use that scholarship for a year because that's all you're going to need it for, and you'll have it available for the following season. So a lot of work left to do for Louisville on the recruiting trail, and we'll see where that goes. The next thing I want to talk about, I tried to do a quick take on this Rice Commission recommendations thing. It was just way too much to go over in 2 minutes. I tried 3 or 4 times to record it, and I just finally said it ain't going to happen. Just too much to go over. The crux of it was, definitely some good ideas, some good recommendations, but the main focus of it really seems to be, and it starts off by saying and stressing that they wanted to keep the ideal, collegiate model in place, and that amateur model of no payments of any sort is still at the crux of this entire recommendation. So you didn't see any big changes as far as allowing athletes to receive any sort of additional payment outside of that cost of attendance payment that all athletes get now. And I really wish we would have seen something, at least in terms of the image, allowing to use your image to profit from that image, because the schools profit so much themselves. And what I want to do now is kind of go over the basics of it. I'm sure many of you who've listened to sports radio, you've seen a lot or you've heard, a lot of what these recommendations were, but I want to put it visually here since I'm doing a video, and this way you can see. And what I really did, I didn't go through the whole thing line by line. I kind of breezed through it, tried to get the main points, and what I took away from it was this. It essentially had three primary areas of focus. One of them dealing with what I refer to as athletes looking or having a high interest in playing at another level. So guys, looking towards playing professionally and having a high interest in that. A section that dealt with harsher penalties and accountability when infractions occur. And then finally, an area that dealt with getting control of what they refer to as the non-scholastic basketball market, or as most of us refer to it as the AAU. So breaking those further down, that first section in terms of the athletes with a high interest in moving to the next level, they were suggested getting rid of the one and done rule, which that's not really groundbreaking. I think most anticipate that's going to happen regardless. And in addition, that's not something that they are going to be in charge of making a decision on. That's an NBA rule. They do note that in the report, but of course that's not something that I feel would take 6 months to come up with. That's something that really, like I said, was already going to be, many feel it's already going to be enacted here very soon. Another suggestion, which is kind of a mixed bag, and Mike Rutherford had a very good point, something that also crossed my mind: allow undrafted players to return to college. That is a noble concept to allow that to happen, but that's a serious issue if you're a basketball coach and you have, let's say you're John Calipari, and you've got 3 guys who are entering the draft and not hiring an agent, and then they don't get drafted. You're going to let those guys come back. Well, John Calipari has 6 guys every year that come in as freshmen. How do you account for that? How do you allow those guys to come back? If they don't come back, then you're up a creek there without a paddle. If you've anticipated they might come back, haven't filled a scholarship, then you're left with an empty scholarship. Or if you fill that scholarship and they come back, what option do they have? Are you going to give that school an extra scholarship for a year to allow that athlete to return if it has been filled? Are you going to allow that athlete to go somewhere else openly since that scholarship was filled by the school he did attend? So there's that idea, that suggestion opens up a myriad of other issues that would have to be figured out before you enact it, and they didn't really get into how they're going to handle that very serious issue. So that's something else in this whole series of recommendations. It seems like whenever one thing is suggested or recommended, then there's a domino effect of other things you've got to figure out as well. And then the next thing is allow athletes the ability to work with an officially licensed NCAA agent while in college. Again, I think that's a noble concept, but to me, I'm a little lost at how this is going to work. These agents that they allow the athletes and their families to work with while in college have to be licensed through the NCAA, so I assume go through some sort of training, adhere to certain policies, and I assume those policies are going to be you don't pay the player anything or their family anything. So I assume that there's going to be some sort of agreement in place that when you sign that you are going to then be locked into signing with that agent if you achieve a professional career. And, how binding is that contract going to be? I don't know. So it's very interesting how that's going to be handled. So again, a couple ideas there that I think are very good in terms of the goal and what you're trying to allow those players to have, the freedom to come back if you're not drafted, the ability to work with an agent. But there are other issues outside of that I think they still need to iron out if they're going to try to put these concepts in place moving forward. And then the next section, dealing with harsher penalties and accountability. And one of the penalties suggested, when a serious level 1 infraction occurs, and I assume maybe this is a repeat violator, but they did suggest as much as a 5-year postseason ban, which to me, you might as well just do a death penalty, because that is a massive penalty. And the implications here, not just for the school, but you're talking a community. Think about Louisville. If they received a postseason ban of 5 years, the financial impact, not just on the university, but the community as a whole. You're talking about the Yum Center, people not as enthusiastic about the season because they know there's no postseason. and the financial ramifications throughout the community has on businesses, and the whole infrastructure, that's a serious issue. And of course, then the Yum Center has the tax increment financing that all goes into paying off the debt of the arena. So there's all sorts of domino effects from that penalty that you have to keep in mind now. And I think that's why they did away with the death penalty. They saw that this just wasn't a penalty on the school and the program. This is a penalty that goes far beyond that, and they have to understand the implications of such a penalty. Something that I did like was holding higher level university administrators accountable, your presidents, the higher ups at the university, when violations occur, sort of taking that, the thing that they enacted not that long ago for coaches, that you can't say, I didn't know. They're taking that to the next level of university administration, to those presidents and other administrators. And then something else that I don't know if it was really a recommendation, but it was something that was pointed out. They said we can't allow schools to use loopholes such as the one, well, they didn't point out North Carolina specifically, but they did say, using an example of schools saying that non-athletes received the benefit. So as a result of that, you can't say that it was a penalty, or a benefit that only athletes received. And I think that's kind of the loophole that North Carolina used. So this was kind of shot at them, that we need to clean that up. Can't use that as a way out when violations occur. And of course, we know that North Carolina did use that. Now, of course, they also use the academic, scholastic side of things, where the NCAA basically says we stay out of developing scholastic, classes and such at universities. We're not in charge of that. We're in charge of the athletic administration, so we can't get involved in what makes up a class or what defines a class. So that was kind of the second part of what North Carolina used to skirt the harsher penalties on them. And then finally, gaining control of, again, what they call the non-scholastic basketball, or the AAU market. And their suggestions were, and I like this, and I think the AAU circuit, while I think it's good in many ways, it allows coaches a one-stop shop, no pun intended there, to look at a lot of players at one setting, in a very structured setting, but that's also a location where a lot of this corruption has taken place, be it guys off the streets, these runners, or really the shoe companies funneling money, as we've seen obviously from the FBI investigation. So the NCAA understands that they need to get control of this, but they did a great job of skirting around the fact that they still want these shoe companies to keep their money involved in this, but they just want greater transparency. So just to run down here, develop and run regional, programs and camps, have big camps every year that allows the coaches to come and see a lot of athletes at once, and then have greater transparency of all the money, coming in and out of these leagues from shoe companies, from sponsors, how those affect the coaches, basically just try to get control. Like I said, control is really at the crux of all of this. When you're talking about, why the NCAA even wants to do all these, these reforms, control. It comes down to control. They lost control and now they want control back. But at the same time, they don't want that money to go to anyone other than the NCAA. And that, I think, is a major issue. They stressed in this report that they want to hold to that true amateurism model, and they stress the ideals and the reward you get of having a college education, and how over your lifetime you make more money. But the bottom line is the differences you see in many other areas of a college, whether it's a business student, whether it's a kid in the music school, whether it's a tennis player or a golfer. These players can go very early and make a lot of money, and no one really seems to care. But when it comes to basketball, because that makes a lot of money at the collegiate level, they want to have all these rules and regulations involved. And that's where you start to get into issues where, you got to treat everybody the same, and they simply are not doing that. And I thought, I really had hoped that they'd finally say, look, we need to at least allow some of these athletes, the higher up ones, to have the ability to make some money off their image. They did interestingly note that one of the issues was the fact that they were currently involved as a defendant in a case, and I think it's the O'Bannon trial, with the likeness and the image being used. That's why we don't see the NCAA games anymore. And maybe that's the reason they steered away from this. They were probably told, let's try to steer away from this, because if we start recommending that's going to hurt us in court. That's probably a real reason why they did not recommend allowing athletes to profit from their image. I think it's a no-brainer. For a long time, my idea has been it should be fairly simple to set up. You have athletes, you have these NCAA basketball and football games on the PlayStation, the Xbox. and other formats. And that's a blanket payment that goes out to every athlete. Every athlete gets that money. Every football player gets the same amount. But then you have situations where you have the jersey sales. Very popular athletes, Teddy Bridgewater, Lamar Jackson, for example, they would have sold a lot of jerseys in the Louisville market, really, and even beyond, especially when you talk about a Heisman winner, Lamar Jackson. Okay, that number 8 jersey, oh, that's a Louisville number 8 player. That's generic Bob Ocho. That's not Lamar Jackson. Well, that's silly. We all know it's Lamar Jackson. So then, allow him to profit, put his name on the back, stop, pretending that we all don't understand the situation as it is, and let him profit. I already know, they have to file quarterly reports to licensing companies for how much is sold on everything that's sold has to be documented and reported and given to the schools. They have this information. So it will be as simple as giving every athlete, a code or a number or an account, and that account is tied to anything that has their number, has their name, is attached to them. So when they sell it, they should get a portion of that, and it should fund into an account, and you don't have to pay that account out if it makes the collegiate, powers that be feel better. That account gets funded with all that stuff until they expire, or they complete their collegiate eligibility, or they move on to the next level, and then they can cash that out. Or maybe you have a situation where, you can take out a certain amount to provide to your family if it's needed. Terry Rozier, for example, let's say he had an account when he was at Louisville. At the end of his sophomore year, he may say, hey, how much is in that account? Oh, there's $30,000 in there. Boy, I need to pull, can I pull some of that out? Because my family needs it. Because these athletes are making a lot of money for the schools, especially certain ones. And I think if you're a lower-tiered athlete, you don't play a lot, you play very little, but you're receiving that scholarship, to you, that is a huge thing. That is a massive benefit that's going to get you a long way in your career after college, because you're not going to play professionally. But there are other athletes who, they're the ones that people come to see. They're the ones that are on TV, and people are buying their merchandise or the blank name, number merchandise because of what they do on the field, and the schools benefit financially and the TV networks financially. So I really think that would have been a great recommendation, but they didn't make it. I think they're going to continue to, fight that, and we'll see where that goes. And it was unfortunate. That was my biggest disappointment in it all, that there was no attempt to even explore that or even, ask questions on how we might be able to improve that moving forward. So that's kind of the crux of it. I went a little longer there than I wanted to, but for those of you who maybe didn't see specifics, I wanted to kind of give a rundown of that Rice Commission recommendations. And so there that was. The NFL draft is tonight. Louisville should play prominent roles. Obviously, I think Jair Alexander's a no-brainer. I think he goes tonight. Lamar Jackson likely as well. His name is just kind of all over the place lately. And, I really hope that in the end it all works out for Lamar in terms of where he goes. I hope he goes to a situation where you've got a quarterback in place, but maybe not in place for much longer. Be that New Orleans, be that New England, be that Pittsburgh, a guy who's already there, established, that allows you to go in, learn, get your feet wet, get comfortable, and not have everything thrown at you at once. So I think that's a good thing about Lamar, probably not going very early. Hopefully he won't go to a situation where they're asking him to do way too much too early and throw everything at him at once. He can gradually work his way in and get into a system that's a good fit for him. But we'll probably know tonight where Lamar Jackson goes. I think a lot of people lately have been saying Arizona is a very good possibility, outside of New England as well. I think that 15 to 25 range. New Orleans is, I think, at 27, so he'd have to go a little lower, but that would be, I think, a very good fit in terms of the system they have there. And the fact that, of course, Drew Brees, learn to talk, has a little bit more time left as well. Might be a good way to understudy there, get comfortable, and then move forward. So tonight we'll probably know where Lamar and Jair go. And Jerron Christian has been receiving a lot of talk as well, so maybe even his name is called tonight. But the NFL draft tonight on Fox. I keep forgetting that it's on Fox this year, so tune into that to see where Louisville, once again, it's going to be neat to see them back in the first round because they kind of got away for a few years there. Louisville was a very, had the highest number of picks in the early rounds of the NFL draft going there. So good to see that back in place. The last thing I want to talk about today is this book, The Last Temptation of Rick Pitino. This information on this book came out last week. It's not going to be published until later this year in the fall, I believe. But my issue here is, and earlier on I spoke how I'm going to talk about Louisville and how they're up against it on the recruiting trail with the negative information, and how over the past 2 years we've all seen it. We understand the situation. You get special reports, investigations, articles, talking about Louisville. And nearly every time, it's nothing new. It's a rehash of information. It's oftentimes not completely accurate, but people don't care. They see Louisville and they're like, ooh, what have they done now? What's going on at Louisville? They screwed up again. They're a dirty program. And the pylon just has continued and continued. Now, look, I don't think Louisville should not have gotten punished at all. Obviously, they did. They made their bed. They deserved some criticism and some punishment. But at the same time, when you have nonstop articles, nonstop books, rehashing information, nothing new, and you have individuals like this guy here writing this book, it's like people are coming into the room. Louisville made their bed, but then somebody keeps coming in, messing it up, and Louisville's got to start all over again to repair their image. I mean, Louisville has gone above and beyond in terms of getting rid of all the people involved in all these scandals. They're doing their best to move on, but they simply can't do it because you have continual articles and things and such. And now you've got this book penned, ironically, by a guy who wrote 2 books with John Calipari. Kind of the irony there. I don't know if there's a connection that you need to make as far as that's concerned. But the guy had already penned 2 books with Calipari that kind of ripped their names off of the books that Rick Pitino had written. And now this book rips the name off a popular movie. But the thing that I found most interesting was in this book, the promotional material that was sent out last week. I read the little article, not really an article, but just a little foreword, I guess, or just the promo material. He says in this book, he starts off by talking about this big event Louisville had, talking about the money Louisville makes. And Louisville had a big party to unveil the contract with Adidas, and all these people were there. And then just 2 weeks later, the FBI wrapped up, and it was an end game in an investigation into college basketball. Well, I don't know where he gets the idea that an end game has been reached. Here's a guy penning a book about with Rick Pitino's name in the title. So basically he's making the assumption that Rick Pitino's end came at the hands of this FBI investigation. Rick Pitino's name wasn't even listed in the documents, but this guy has it on the title of the book. If that's not an attempt at a money grab, I don't know what is. Now, he's a public figure. I don't know what sort of legal ramifications are there if you're trying to say, he's defaming Rick Pitino's reputation, but he's drawn a conclusion. Okay, he says the FBI reached an endgame in September of 2017. Nowhere has the FBI ever stated they've reached an endgame. In fact, of course, they just had that superseding indictment a few weeks ago, in which not only did they say there was no endgame, they said if anybody with information, please reach out and contact us. This investigation is ongoing, and Rick Pitino has not been found guilty of anything as of yet. But here you have a guy who's written a book and is promoting a book that seems to declare that Rick Pitino has been found guilty of quite a few things. That's a bold move. That's a bold strategy, Cotton. We'll see how it plays out for this guy. But I'm going to go ahead and make a bold prediction of my own that I'm not sure this book's going to get published, at least not in the form that it is written right now, because this guy's jumping to a lot of conclusions. And of course, as many have when it comes to the University of Louisville and people involved in the scandals, they write what they want to write. They draw conclusions that they want to draw. And everybody else just kind of takes that as gospel. And again, that's the challenge that Louisville has dealt with for quite some time. And until these types of things end, they're going to continue to face that challenge. It's been very difficult. So Chris Mack, on the recruiting trail, that's the kind of thing he's going to continue to face. And that's why I kind of mentioned it earlier. And this is what I was referring to, this book, which will be interesting to see where that goes. Because like I said, that's very interesting that he would say that the FBI reached an endgame when they in no way whatsoever have ever claimed that they have. I'm going to wrap things up right now. Got to go get the kids at school. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This has been a Ville on the Ville episode. As always, go Cards.